Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. In the last few months, I have started to go into a different direction with some of my model collecting. I've gone toward the direction of die-cast model aircraft. Yes, for the first time on the channel, we're going to talk about one of those, specifically this 1/400 scale by Gemini Jet's Boeing 747-8, liveried in this United States Air Force livery for the purpose of carrying the President of the United States. Yes! This particular Boeing 747-8I is the new proposal for Air Force One, as in the aircraft that carries the President of the United States. This is a new model release from Gemini Jets. We'll talk about Gemini Jets, we'll talk about the Boeing 747, we'll talk about the President of the United States, and, well, we'll show you what's going on with the ins and outs of this wonderful die-cast scale model in 1/400 scale by Gemini. I've got quite a few of these aircraft now, all in 1/400. They seem to be the best compromise between detail and overall size. The 1/200 scale seems to be a little bit too big for me and for most people as well, because you need more space for those because they're bigger, but definitely, I really like what Gemini Jets and other manufacturers do with these die-cast model aircraft. I'm amazed with the amount of detail that they managed to cram into such a small form factor, and they're just really cool things to have. They look really nice, and I've seen people do all sorts of things with their displays, creating airport dioramas and things like that. I'm not quite to that level of sophistication yet with this hobby, but I thought that perhaps some of you would be interested to see this, and for those of you who are avid model aircraft collectors, this is one of the newer releases from Gemini Jet, so I figured that perhaps if you're considering getting this model, this might give you some information about it. So sit back, relax for the next 30 or so minutes, and we'll talk about this Boeing 747-8I by Gemini Jets, liveried for the President of the United States. The Boeing 747-8I. Well, first of all, it is a brand new variant of the Boeing 747, which of course has been an absolute stalwart of the skies, having its first flight on February 9th, 1969. Yes, the 747 has been flying in some configuration or another since before man walked on the moon. That is quite a long time ago, over 51 years ago, as of the time of making this video. The aircraft entered service, in civilian service anyway, January 22nd, 1970 with Pan Am. The 747, of course, is still in service, having been produced from 1968 to the present day. The largest users so far in modern day parlance of the 747 are British Airways, Lufthansa, Korean Air, and Atlas Air over in the cargo side of aviation. To date, we have 1,557 747s built of all configurations, and that is of January of this year. Unit cost initially was about $24 million for the 747-100 variant. That, adjusted for inflation, is $146.7 million US dollars today. And for the 300 variant, in other words, one of the later variants of the 747 still being produced today, $83 million in 1982 dollars when the 300 series was introduced. That is $219.9 million today for launch spec 747-300 back in 1982. Several variants of the 747 have been produced and are still being produced. We have the 747-100, which was the first variant. We've got the 400, which now is probably the primary variant that you see in civil service. The 747-8, which this plane is. The Boeing VC-25, which is the predecessor of this particular configuration of 747, and of course the Boeing E-4, which is outfitted with some special instrumentation on it, colloquially known as the Doomsday plane, which is a stablemate to what is colloquially known as Air Force One, which is this aircraft, at least its intended purpose of being Air Force One, and the current VC-25, which is Air Force One. This, though, it is the VC-25B, which is, of course, a variant of the 747-8I, the I standing for Intercontinental, and basically it is just a further optimized and stretched variant of the original 747, as are many variants of civil jets that have been produced over the decades. The 747-8I, Boeing launched this project all the way back in November of 2005, and it can carry nominally 467 passengers, although seating configurations may vary somewhat, over a range of approximately 8,000 nautical miles, cruising at Mach 0.85. So pretty much transonic flight going on here on the 747. Not really transonic, but you get the picture. The 8i is slated to be quieter, or at least reported to be quieter, more fuel efficient, and therefore it should translate into lower seat prices for your average traveler. However, we all know what the airline industry has been going through as of late, so we'll see if any of that actually comes to fruition with the 747-8i as actually put into practice. However, this particular variant of the 747-8i, this is a very special one. This is the aircraft that is intended to be serving as the official transport for the President of the United States beginning in 2024. As of the time of recording this, the appropriations for the construction of two new VC-25Bs, the B spec is going to be the designation of this aircraft. That bill was signed into law in 2020, and construction of both aircraft have begun over there at the Boeing plant, and hopefully they're going to be going into service by 2024. Of course, the initial configuration of the Boeing 747-8i is going to get some facelifts, some unclassified and some very highly classified in terms of what the aircraft ultimately is going to look like and ultimately what its capabilities will be. Quite obviously, on the nose of the aircraft here, you can see one of those modifications. Yes, that little raised section there on the fuselage there, that is so that this particular 747 will be capable of in-flight refueling via one of the flying tankers that either the United States military or other allied forces may be employing. So, theoretically speaking, for as long as the aircraft is mechanically sound and that you have enough provisions for the people on board, the aircraft could, in theory, fly indefinitely. So, of course, it doesn't mean forever, because eventually everything breaks, but yeah, the thing could, in theory, fly for several days at a time, simply because it could refuel while in mid-air. So that's one of the modifications plainly evident on this particular Gemini jet's rendition of the 747-8i. Before we take a closer look at the model, though, I think we need to take a look at the box, because in every YouTube review I have seen of a die-cast model aircraft, they've taken a look at the box, so we're going to take a look at the box too. This one is, of course, by Gemini Jets, and it is your typical Gemini Jets box, but we do have some special insignias on it, given this particular aircraft's intended purpose. 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft, indeed it is. There is the seal of the President of the United States of America, and there is the make and type of the aircraft, Boeing 747-8i, and then, not going to make the whole thing into frame here, but there is a rendering of the aircraft with gear retracted, quite evidently, but yeah, rendering of the aircraft looks quite like the model, and it's actually very close to the actual size of the model itself. Very cool. Gemini Jets in the upper left, and then their slogan, made for collectors, by collectors, and that's trademarked, you better believe it. Other panels on the box, this one, of course, all the typical Gemini stuff that you see on these. Panel here, another rendering of the aircraft, 747-8i. 1/400 die-cast scale model. There's your item number for those of you keeping score at home. That is GJAF01913, or if we're going to be aviation nerds about it, that is Golf Juliet Alpha Foxtrot Oscar 1913. Thank you very much. I actually use those at work all the time. Adult collectible model. Warning, contains small parts. Unsuitable for children under 14 years of age. So those of you who are 13 and 11 months, sorry, you can't have this. Anyway, inside the box, you get, obviously, an empty space where the aircraft would be, but you do get the upper panel, which is customary on Gemini. You get all of this stuff. I'll read an excerpt of it. Forever the Queen of the Skies, the new 747-8i passenger and the 747-8F cargo now bring the venerable 747 well into the 21st century. First announced in 2005, the 747-8 initially took to the skies on 8 February 2010. The new series of 747-8 aircraft now replace the ever-popular 747-100, 200, 300, and 400 types, whose lineage dates back to the 747's first flight in 1969. So in other words, everything that we had talked about, some technical specifications on this particular aircraft, which doesn't really exist yet, but livery there, United States Air Force, a new design that's actually quite a big departure from the conventional livery that we've been seeing on Air Force One for decades now, blue and white. This one is red, white, and blue, which is, hey, maybe that's more appropriate. Aircraft type, obviously Boeing 747-8i. Registration is 30,000. Max takeoff weight, this would be classified in reality, so these are specs taken from the 747-8i in its civil variants. 987,000 pounds max takeoff weight, cruising speed 561 miles per hour, range is 8,896 nautical miles. So right around 800, or rather 8,800 nautical miles there, which we talked about earlier. Length on the aircraft, 250 feet 2 inches. The height is 63 feet 6 inches, and the wingspan 224 feet 7 inches there. And you can see the aircraft here in schematic view from profile as well as from above. Otherwise, configuration on the thing very similar to other variants of the 747, as have been flying around for now 51 years. Got the aircraft back here in our field of view and now spinning around for us. Just take a look at some of the more macrocosmic features here. We're in 1/400 scale here, so the aircraft is about 6.5, 7 inches long. The wingspan is about 6 inches as well, so we've got a reasonable size to play with here. The construction of most of the aircraft is die-cast metal. The fuselage is entirely die-cast. The wings are die-cast as well. The engines are plastic, as well as the engine mounts there on the wings, but the empennage there, the vertical stabilizer, and then the horizontal stabilizer and the elevators there at the rear, they are also die-cast. Everything very prim and proper on this one. It's very nicely secured everywhere in terms of the wings being mounted into the fuselage there. They're mounted directly into the side of the fuselage. They are not the cradle arrangement that you see on some other models, particularly some smaller models of a smaller type than this, but still in 1/400 scale. So very nice construction all around. The landing gear, as we see it rotating around here, the landing gear are plastic, I'm led to believe, but the tires are actually rubber, so that's very nice. And obviously zoomed in on the main gear here, but the nose gear is also put together very nicely there. And you see the strut that the nose gear sits on. Also rubber tires on there. So at 1/400 scale, even though things are quite tiny at this scale, the detail is very, very nice, I've got to say. You see the engine nacelles there, the exhaust side of the engine there, with the little striations there, the vortex generators along the rear side of the engine nacelles. Very cool, and that's a feature on the Dash 8 that is new to the 747 series. A few other types of engines there have run those particular nacelle designs in the past, but this is the introduction of that design to the 747 series, and it really does look cool. You don't really see it very much as you pull away here, but it's a very nice visual effect, and obviously the reason for that is, I presume, that they are generating some low pressure in the engine exhaust just to help the exhaust run out of the engines a little bit more efficiently, as if it needs any help. It's being shot out of there at tremendous velocity, but probably to cut down on turbulent flow in the exhaust, meaning that the engines could breathe a little bit better and save a little bit more fuel, as one of the goals of the 8i project is to make these aircraft a little bit more fuel efficient. Also, in that regard, they have redesigned the wings on the 747, so definitely little improvements, trying to improve the efficacy of these aircraft and make them more efficient, more sustainable in our modern era where resource costs continue to skyrocket. Stopping the rotation here for a moment, if we may, we could take a closer look at some of the features on this aircraft. First of all, if we don't lose our focus, there we go. You can see here on the right wing, you can see the engine nacelles and the engine fan blades inside there. They don't move because this is 400 scale, but on the 200 scale models, a lot of those fan blades do actually move, so that must be a nice touch. But this at 1/400, they are static, but they look very cool. As we get the lighting in there, you can see that there are individual blades there coming out of the hub, so that looks very nice. Also here, more inboard toward the fuselage, you can see that we have representations of the landing lights and other marker lights across the leading edge of the wing. You can see the shut lines where the leading edge slats would come down, so that looks very nice and looks pretty correct. And then moving outboard toward the edge of the wing here, toward the wing tip, you don't have any end fences on these wings, as you do on some other wing designs, but you can see just how thin that wing is. And of course, they are trying to maximize your lift to drag ratio. Cut down on drag, maximize on lift. More lift for less drag, that means you burn less fuel, which means, yay, it's more efficient. So that's one of the many design tweaks that they've made to the 747 in the 8i series. Moving back toward the nose section of the aircraft, as we talked about prior, you can see that bump there, right there on the nose tip. That is the door covering the receptacle for the in-flight refueling system. So again, unlike any other 747 out there in civil service, you've got the capacity for in-flight refueling on this particular variant. Very cool. Also along the fuselage here, you can see the graphics. You've got the cheat line there breaking up the blue from the white section of the livery. Of course, that's in red, and that looks very nice. You can also see the windows across the nose section of the aircraft. The doors there, all printed on, and all the graphics here are printed on. Including the windows and doors, so no actual windows cut into the side of the fuselage, but looks pretty cool, I've got to say. And it's, again, this is a very nicely done model. Taking a look up top side there over the hump over the second deck on the 747, you can see 3 antenna aerials there. This is a departure from the other 747-8i models that I've seen that typically just have 1 antenna up there if they have any at all. Obviously, this aircraft being designed to transport the President of the United States and other VIPs, you'd want to have good communications capability. The idea for this aircraft really is that it would give the President any real capacity on board that he would normally have at the White House. And that includes the ability to direct combat operations, in theory, if all hell broke loose. So that's part of the reason why this aircraft needs such good communications capabilities. The other reason for that is this is a military aircraft at the end of the day, so we also have some features on board, I am certain, that are not meant for public eyes to know about. Speculation in the past has included things like escape pods, missiles, chaff flares, things like that. I have absolutely no doubt that Air Force One has abilities to defend itself while in flight, both passively and actively, offensively and defensively. They will never tell you about those systems, but I am absolutely sure that they exist, and at risk of being scooped up by the FBI, I'm going to say that if you tried to enter an engagement with Air Force One, you would lose. However, that's not the point of this video. Let's take a look at this thing a little bit more closely for the model that it is. Taking the camera up freehand now to take a closer look at some of the finer details on this wonderful model here. The thing that really sets these sorts of models apart from other types of scaled models, particularly of cars or even larger scale aircraft, is that the graphics here are all printed on. These are not water slide decals or anything like that, and the windows are not actual openings in the fuselage. They're all printed. And to me, it's absolutely amazing how crisp these are able to be done. Remember, this is in 1/400 scale. Each window that you can see there, they are roughly, I would say, 1 millimeter high, roughly. And that's perhaps being a little bit too liberal with my measurements. They're very small. Yet, zooming in here as close as we can get without losing our focus, they look really crisp and clean. Also, graphically, you can see the little air data sensors along the nose there. Those are pitot tubes that be measuring air pressure, air speed, things like that, and piping that data up to the cockpit where they could obviously react to the information they're getting. The little fairing over the receptacle for the aerial refueling across the nose there, that is about 1 centimeter long, just to give you a sense of the scale. So that is very nice. Moving up the nose here, you can see the cockpit area, the windows. We have wipers installed. We also have these small black dots over the nose. I think those are also air data probes, or they may have something to do with the de-icing system. They might even be misters, for all I know, for sending de-icing fluid up over the windshield. But I don't know, but they're there, and they look good. They're crisp and clean, so obviously they're meant to be there. The nose gear here, looking very nice. Prim and proper, not too bad. A little bit of deformation along the wheel rims there, but I mean, it's so incredibly small that I think you could forgive them. But that is a real rubber tire on both wheels there of the main gear. Moving along the side there, there's the door on the upper deck. That looks real nice. And then moving back here a little bit, there is the presidential seal down across the lower section of the nose. This is where the cargo deck would be, roughly this level, and whatever else is going on below deck on Air Force One that we'll never know about. But yep, presidential seal is there. And then we get across here to the top, the white section of the fuselage, United States of America right there. That's all put together very nicely. And then, of course, we have got the left wing jutting out toward us. Got a little NACA duct down in this section there for some intake air, probably for cooling the cargo bay and other instrumentation or mechanicals that they've got down there. We've got some floodlights here, landing lights I presume, and then the leading edge of the wing. And there is our inboard left engine with the vortex generators along the exhaust side of the nacelle. And then our outboard left engine, and you can see the pylons that the engines are mounted to. They're very nicely shaped, looks really cool. And you can also see on the inboard sides of the engines, there is a little fin. You can just see it here from our vantage point, but we come across to the other side and you can see these little fins on the inboard sides of the engines. They're also there just for a little bit of aerodynamic cleaning, if you will, to make things a little bit more efficient. And there are the fans there on the intake side of the engine. Looks very, very nice, and it looks to be a separate unit that's actually in there on a little shaft, splined to a little shaft there inside the engine. Very nice attention to detail on this one by Gemini. Moving toward the midships and tail section of the plane, coming down here, another ingress-egress door. There is the seal of the United States Air Force, or the emblem, the roundel rather. Registration 30,000, and then the flag of the United States on the tail, looking really cool. And there, of course, is the horizontal stabilizer and the elevators there for your pitch control. On the left wing, you can see that we have got nice shut lines around the control surfaces. So we have got the flaperons, we've got the slats and spoilers, and then, of course, all of that, the main trailing edge flaps as well, where you have these little pylons here, also little vortex generators. I'm not entirely sure why a lot of aircraft have those. I know they have an aerodynamic purpose, but I don't entirely know what they are. Things for me to learn. Again, just getting into this hobby. Remember, I know quite a bit about airplanes, but I don't know all the terminology and all of that stuff. So, I'm still getting into it. But, yep, there is the port side of the aircraft. Looks very, very cool. And the starboard side of the aircraft, obviously, it's a mirror image of the port side, but again, you can see all the graphics here. Yet again, looks very, very nice. Nice, crisp printing on the fuselage and everywhere else. Very nice. Very, very nice indeed. There are those antenna aerials that we talked about earlier. You can see 3 of them on top of the hump there. Looks cool. And coming down the right wing, our inboard and outboard engine nacelles. Very cool. Leading edge of the wing, and then the wing tip. Notice the green strobe here on the right wing tip. The left wing tip has a red one. That looks correct. Very cool. Very nice detail. And then, of course, registration, Air Force roundel, and then the United States flag again on the tail, but here shown mirrored because we're on the right side of the aircraft now. Very nice. Over here you can see the APU exhaust. This is the auxiliary power unit that provides hydraulic and electrical power while the aircraft is on the ground and also in flight too, but generally once the engines are started the APU would be shut down. Not entirely sure if that's the protocol on Air Force One though, because I reckon they have quite a few more electronic devices on this plane. So that is the exhaust outlet for the APU, and that appears to be a separate element relative to the rest of the fuselage around it. It is not just painted on there. There is an actual pipe coming out. So that's cool. That's nice attention to detail here by Gemini. And again, the APU it's actually a turbine engine in its own right. It's a jet engine. Usually they run on the same fuel as the main engines on the aircraft, but there it is. Do we have an APU intake visible anywhere here? I can't quite tell. Would it be down low? I don't know. I can't quite see if they've rendered an APU intake, but there would be NACA duct someplace in the tail section somewhat near to the auxiliary power unit so that obviously you could get intake air into that engine because it is a combustion engine, and like all combustion engines, you need to have an air intake in order to get combustion. But that's really nice. Like all of that, quite a lot. Nose on view of the aircraft now. You can see just how everything is proportioned. Doesn't look too bad. That in-air refueling receptacle there, the fairing over it, looks a little bit crooked relative to the tip of the nose, but for all I know, that's how it actually should look. I don't think it would look that way, but I don't know. We haven't seen this particular variant of the 747 yet, technically speaking, but I do think that's just an application fault on the model rather than emulating anything real. But yeah, leading edges of the wings, as we saw before, engines here on the left wing. They look really nice. I really do like that detail, the separate fan blades in there. That does look very nice indeed. There's your main landing gear. Coming down through here. Looks pretty good. Yeah. You can see the little slots there that were bent over once the axles were put into position on the model. But yeah, you can see all the trucks there, counting 4 of them for the main gear, inboard and outboard. Very nice. You can see the landing gear doors as well. Looks good. And then, of course, your nose gear once again. So really, yeah, it's a nice model. I've got to say, it really, really is. And I do like these somewhat dramatic looking shots here, looking slightly upward at the aircraft here, playing with the shadow in the background. Looks really, really nice, and I understand why they wanted to make a movie about Air Force One, because yeah, it's a cool looking thing. Very nice. And just a quick shot of the rear of the aircraft now. Not as much to see back here, but there you can see that exhaust pipe for the APU. That's in there quite nicely. I like that a lot. And again, you can see that that is a separate element. If our focus will set its depth of field correctly. It almost did. There we go. Yep, you can see that is a separate element from the rest of the fuselage, so that's nice. Moving down the rear side of the landing gear, you can see that the model is not quite sitting on the outboard gear. I mean, it's a little bit tilted, and I think that has to do with the inboard center gear being a little bit shorter or a little bit lower down than the, well, not the inboard center gear, the right-hand center gear being a little bit shorter or lower than the left-hand center gear. But not bad, really not noticeable, but you can see that the outboard left gear is a little bit not quite on the ground, but who am I to judge? Perhaps the Loadmaster just allocated the cargo a little bit badly, but the rear sides, the exhaust sides of the engines, will we focus? Will we? Yes, yep, the exhaust side of the engines there looks very, very nice. Trailing edge of the wing, you can see some of the shut lines from the flap slats and spoilers. Cool. Very, very cool. Gotta say, still getting into this hobby, but so far so good. I've been very pleased with what I have found on not only Gemini's, but all sorts of different manufacturers whose pieces I've been acquiring here, and I've got to say, they look pretty good. They're just, they're cool things to have, and certainly quite pleased with this one. Really, really nice straight out of the box. So there it was, the Boeing 747-8I, liveried as the VC-25B in the proposal for Air Force One, which hopefully will come into service by 2024. 2 of these aircraft are already under construction at the Boeing plant, and again, hopefully they will be phased in within the next 3 or 4 years. That's what the appropriations bill has asked for. So whoever the next president of the United States is after 2024, so 2020 is an election year, we may have a new president in 2021, but definitely after the second term of the current president, should he earn one, the next president of the United States will be flying around most likely on something that looks pretty much like this. Of course, the final version of the VC-25B is probably going to vary somewhat from what we see here on this model, because something like this, being a military aircraft, being something that has a very important and highly secured job to be doing, it's constantly under development. And I'm sure that things have been done to the current fleet of VC-25s that have been in service since about 1990, I believe. I'm sure that they are always undergoing some sort of modification, revision, or upgrade just to keep up with the demands that comes with flying some of the most important people on the planet. So we'll see ultimately what this aircraft looks like in reality when we do finally see them come into service, but there's going to be 2 of them, just like we have 2 VC-25s right now, which share the burden of carrying the President of the United States and his most trusted advisors around the world wherever they may be needed. Gemini jets, though, they are a stalwart of the die-cast scale model aircraft manufacturer community. They always do a great job on most of their models, and this one's certainly no exception there. It looks absolutely great, and for being a brand new release, certainly you would expect perhaps to see some teething issues, but nope, this one looks absolutely great. Again, the only flaw that I could point out with this one, as we took a look at, the aircraft does not quite sit square on the main gear. There's a little bit of roll dialed into the aircraft on the ground, and that's just because the height difference there on the center gear, the right-hand center gear, appears to be a little bit longer than the left, so it leans a little bit. But be that as it may, it's a great addition to your 1/400 scale collection if that's what you're dealing with. A 1/200 scale variant of this might be coming out at some point, I don't know, but certainly given the anticipated popularity of this model, again, I think it's going to be pretty popular. I would not at all be surprised to see Gemini come out with a 1/200 scale variant of this, which of course would have some more expanded detail simply because they have more space to play with in terms of the form factor of a 1/200 scale versus a 1/400 scale. But all of that aside, fantastic model here. It's built very nicely. It looks good. The graphics are very crisp and clean, so really no real complaints about this one. If you are considering it, definitely jump on it. Some stores are doing pre-orders. Obviously, some are already delivering the model, so do take a good look at this if you are in the scale model aircraft market. It's certainly something that I think is going to have a very nice place in your collection, especially if you do collect military aircraft as well. But of course, it's just really unique because this is a civil jet straight up that has been modified to carry the President of the United States. So just like the other VC-25A spec before it, this one is definitely going to be one to keep, I do reckon. Until next time, though, I do thank you all very, very much for watching, and again, this is the first time I've ever reviewed a scale model aircraft on the channel, so I'm sure that as I continue to do these, I'll get better at it, and I'll get better at fact-checking and things like that. But for the moment, that's the best I could do. I do thank you all very much for contending with me for the last 30 minutes. Until next time, though, I thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.